My name is Rita Sharon. I'm so happy to welcome you to tonight's, what shall I call it, event. Many of you have been with us at Narrative Medicine Rounds before, but quite a few of you have never been here. And I know, Peter Shapiro, the way to your heart is through jazz. I will tell you very quickly what brought us to make this invitation and what it was that so filled our hearts that it was accepted. In 2008, I was in the kitchen in East Hampton listening to the radio. And I heard on Fresh Air on NPR an interview with a musician who was talking about his recent experiences in an ICU somewhere in New York, where he had been in a coma for 2 months. And he described his recovery from that. He described his rehabilitation from that. He described the relearning of the walking and the talking, and then of the playing and then creating music. I said to the person I was with, we gotta go, come on, we gotta go to New York. He said, Smalls, we're going, tonight, now. And so we did that. And I have been a Fred Hersch groupie since then. I've heard him many times. And he has always, as a person who didn't know very much about this music to begin with, he was able to lead me to understand what it is that his music, our music, is capable of. And it wasn't just because he was in an ICU. It was because he understands and inhabits the music so personally and profoundly that he can let those of us in Smalls or Village Vanguard or Rubin Museum or Cornelia Street Cafe understand that. And he has a new, you all know, but I will tell you that Fred Hersch is one of the trailblazers in jazz and jazz piano today. He is amply acknowledged and awarded. He's been up for many Grammy Awards. He had a Guggenheim in 2003. He's on the faculty of the New England Conservatory. He's one of the, rabbis of his work. He plays with the other most eminent musicians in town and internationally. He recently had a premiere of a production he calls Coma Dreams, My Coma Dreams, which is in part based on his experiences being so ill. They premiered at Montclair State. We're hoping that he'll be able to bring it to New York. When I had to miss that too, I said to Scott, I missed seeing Fred. He says, let's try to get him here. We had never done anything like this. So this is our gift to you, as it is our incredible gift to ourselves, to be able to share the evening with the music and the reflections of Fred Hersch.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm usually more comfortable over there, but I'm gonna stay here for a little while and kind of tell you basically my story. I've decided, since I'm in a somewhat formal setting, not to speak extemporaneously, but I've sort of written down a few thoughts that I'd like to share for you and tell you really what's gone on with me. So I'm sharing my story of basically of a quarter century of living with HIV/AIDS and then the rather disastrous, precipitous events of 2008 and 2009. I've had HIV/AIDS since the mid-1980s. I started with AZT monotherapy when it first became available, and have since taken every ARV that has been released in one combination or another. I've had to deal with many of the side effects and complications of heart. I now take numerous medications for metabolic problems, elevated cholesterol, triglycerides, etc. I'm on a 6 ARV salvage therapy regimen, and that's a sum total of about 25 pills a day, not including supplements or antipsychotic meds, or including those that mitigate the side effects of ARV therapy. Until 3 years ago, my viral load ranged from 50,000 into the millions, and my T cells have hovered at or below 200 for many years. I've also suffered from Crick's belly, lipoatrophy, lipodystrophy, including a buffalo hump, deep depression as a result of shooting myself twice daily with the fusion inhibitor Fusion, hypostemia, loss of salivation, loss of appetite, and dangerously low weight. I've been hospitalized 5 times. The first was in the late 90s for extremely elevated blood sugar from ARV therapy, and fortunately I was not left permanently diabetic. I was next to the hospital in 2005 for a MRSA infection that ate a hole in my back the size of a quarter. In early January of 2008, I was admitted to St. Vincent's Hospital in an advanced state of AIDS-related dementia. The virus had simply attacked my brain. I was paranoid, delusional, and extremely psychotic. I was in a semi-coma for about 10 days and was put on a high dose of Zyprexa. After my release, it took slightly over 2 months for me to come back to normal. Although I had lost weight in the process and was very weak, I was put on 2 just-released antiretroviral drugs while I was in the hospital, Celsentry and Icentris, that reduced my viral load to undetectable for the first time ever. It has remained so since, so the virus and I are basically at a standoff. From mid-March until early June, I had a honeymoon period. I was eating, playing concerts, gaining weight, everything seemed to be headed in the right direction. But around the 6th of June, 2008, I began to feel weak. The next couple of days, I started spiking high fevers. Unfortunately, my internist was on vacation, and the doctors covering for him were not aggressive enough. When I decided to take a bath on the afternoon of June 10th, and found I could not get out of the bathtub nor get dressed once I was out, my partner Scott and I headed immediately to the St. Vincent's emergency room. As soon as I checked in, a blood oxygen sensor was put on my finger. It read below 70. Within minutes, I was triaged and intubated. 4 doctors, 2 from the ICU, and 2 specialists were working on me immediately. I had very low blood pressure and a weak pulse, and my kidneys had shut down. Scott was told the next 24 to 48 hours are critical. A very aggressive pneumonia and sepsis were diagnosed, and I was put in a surgical ICU room since that was what was available. And I stayed there until they moved me into the regular ICU a few days later. I was intubated, put on respirator, hooked up to numerous IVs, and put in a medically induced coma that ultimately lasted 2 months. I remained off ARV treatment for about 10 days. My blood pressure went up and down. I had fevers of unknown origin and was on broad-spectrum antibiotics, including Avelox and Zyvox. Dialysis began on the 4th day. Every day, Scott would come in the morning, talk to the doctors. They were very clear that I was in critical condition. He remembers one of the ICU doctors saying that good things happen very slowly in the ICU, but bad things happen very fast. According to Scott, the challenges were that when the specialists came in and out, he had to continually let them know what had been going on up to date because at that point, my chart was confusing and overwhelming. There were occasional coordination problems. The ICU doctors rotated every 2 weeks, so Scott had to build alliances with the nurses and interface with the new doctors, but all of them were top-notch, and the doctors got up to speed very quickly. It took 2 to 3 weeks to stabilize me, at which point I developed another pneumococcal pneumonia, Klebsiella, more fevers of unknown origin, and blood pressure spikes that had everyone concerned about the possibility of a stroke. My hands and feet were particularly swollen, and Scott explained that I was a pianist and needed physical therapy for my hands. And every day he would check for sheet scars in the morning to see if I'd been moved enough during the night. After the 10th day, I was placed on Zyprexa to avoid potential psychosis again, was given a tracheotomy, and was put on a feeding tube. Unfortunately, the feeding tube remained long after my discharge. I was actually unable to eat or drink for 8 months, since the intubation had paralyzed my right vocal cord and I could not swallow safely. Only with rigorous swallow therapy and a medialization thyroplasty surgery was I able to speak in November and eat in February of 2009. At the 6-week point, they started to wean me from the respirator, first starting with 15 minutes a day and then working up from there. I was on Ativan, methadone, Zyprexa, and Klonopin. Withdrawal from the methadone was not handled as well as it could have been, and I became highly agitated. In early August, I started to wake up, and Scott had to keep telling the nurses not to inject me with Ativan every time I moved. He played music, turned on the television, talked to me, tried to stimulate me. On August 4th, I awoke and recognized him, but I couldn't speak. I didn't have the strength or coordination to use a letterboard or write, so we communicated by me squeezing his hand, once for no, twice for yes. Later, they showed him how to put a finger over my trach hole so that I could speak in a raspy whisper. The nurses in the ICU were amazing. They were well-informed, communicated well with the doctors, even though they were overloaded at most times. The doctors and nurses had mutual respect, and they worked as a truly excellent team. The doctor turnover process generally was smooth. After a day or two, I was placed in a step-down unit, and there was a noticeable loss in the quality of the nursing in many areas: general knowledge, access to information, and perceived interest in the patients. I was very frightened, and I couldn't speak, so I couldn't get anyone's attention. I was there 4 or 5 days in absolute helplessness and misery. Then 2 days in a regular room before I went to an inpatient rehab at Rivington House for a month. There I learned to walk again, did basic OT and PT, and began to speak in a hoarse whisper after my tracheotomy hole healed. After my release from the rehab center, I was very fortunate to find an extraordinary physical therapist and wonderful swallow therapist that helped me get myself back together. But my weight remained around 110 pounds. I suffered diarrhea and incontinence for many months before I was able to eat solid food. The key to my survival was that the triage was quick. The ICU doctors were on hand immediately. I would not have lasted another 12 hours, perhaps less. The ongoing challenge was in keeping all the specialists in the ICU informed on a day-to-day basis. Then in October, I had another pneumonia again and began vomiting up and defecating blood. They had to replace 4 units of blood when I was readmitted to the ICU. But this time I was not intubated, fortunately, but was placed on a CPAP mask. And the hospital generously provided around-the-clock nurse's aid in my room to be sure that I didn't pull my mask off. Fortunately, I was out of the hospital in 1 week this time around. At this point, I should let you know that I have composed this large piece called My Coma Dreams that premiered in May of last year. The piece comes from an interesting outcome of my 2-month coma experience. I don't normally remember my dreams, but as I came to, I remembered a series of nightmares and dreams that were incredibly detailed: smells, sights, colors, textures. Some of them, I'm convinced, were related to what I was going through in the ICU. For example, in one nightmare, I'm strapped in the back seat of a panel van, and indeed I was strapped to my bed for periods of time in the ICU. Some are lyrical, some are surreal, some are comical, including one about Thelonious Monk. In collaboration with a wonderful librettist and director, Herschel Garfein, we've musically woven these scenarios into a full evening piece for 11 musicians, an actor, singer, and animation, both drawn and computer-generated. The audience enters the worlds of my dreams as they also hear the story about what was going on in my medical reality. Everyone who has seen it during its 4 performances has been moved. In sum, this is just my account of my fortunately positive experience with ICU medicine and complications from HIV/AIDS. I owe my life to the extraordinary ICU team at St. Vincent's, now tragically closed, and to my wonderful partner, Scott. The quality of coordinated care that I received has enabled me to speak with you today and play the piano for you now. The amazing work that all of you do in the medical profession is so important to humankind, and it's an honor to be here with you, and I welcome the chance to share what I do with you. Your profession has shared so much with me, and I thank you very much. So the way the rest of this goes is I'm going to play the piano, and then afterwards we'll have some question and answers. And I'd like to start with actually two pieces from my Coma Dreams. The first one is called The Boy, and it's a dream about a little boy who is certainly a stand-in for my partner Scott, and he's trying to give me medication, and I keep telling him to stay away from me, that I'm contagious, but he's very loving and persistent. And then the second one is called Dream of Monk. And in this dream, I'm in a 5-foot by 5-foot cage, so I can't stand up or lie down. I'm in a room. And then the next cage over is Thelonious Monk, who's also in a cage. And I notice him, but we're not interacting at all. And then a man bursts into the room with music paper and pencils, gives it to each of us and says, whoever can write a tune first will be released. So I naturally start scribbling as quickly as I can, and at some point I look up at Monk and he's kind of just smiling. I'd like to play a couple of things that I did not write that I enjoy playing. This is a composition by the great Antonio Carlos Jobim, which I recorded on a solo Jobim album a couple of years ago. This is called O Grande Amor.
great ballads written by Jerome Kern and songs you. I'd like to play another conversation for you, and then we'll have some Q&A. I'd like to just, before I do that, plug two things. I'm at the Village Vanguard all next week with my trio, and we're making a live album, so if you want to have your clapping potentially on a CD, come down and join us. And for those of you inclined, a week from Sunday, the 12th, I'm nominated for 2 Grammy Awards this year, so go online or, God forbid, watch the program. Actually, all the little categories get awarded in the afternoon, so by 7 o'clock I'll know one way or the other. Anyway, I'd like to play one more tune. This is a jazz classic by Benny Golson, and this is called Whisper Not. Thank you.